Before Intel was getting their lunch money stolen by AMD, they were willingly giving it away in 2007, not through the release of a product of their own, but their refusal to take part in one of the largest, most revolutionary product launches in history, the iPhone. The iPhone and the concept of the smartphone are deeply rooted in contemporary culture, but the first iPhone was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. A phone made primarily of a touchscreen when physical keyboards were all the craze? Apple was on the come up after the success of the iPod. Not only that, their Mac lineups had just been rejuvenated by the transition to the superior x86 architecture on, you guessed it, Intel processors. Now Apple needed someone to make a power-sipping, cost-efficient processor for the first generation iPhone. It only makes sense for there to be continuity, right? That someone to bring Apple's mobile play to the forefront was not Intel. It had been rumored for months that Apple's new mobile phone would run on Intel processors, but when the specs were revealed, that wasn't the case. So what happened? How did Intel miss out on having their chips in a phone that sold 1 million units in 75 days, and over 6 million total? Not to mention, iPhones being everywhere. Let's rewind a bit. It's circa 2006. All is right in the world. HD DVD is off to a strong start in the quote-unquote high-definition optical disc format war. The Nintendo Wii has just been released in the US, and that stupid rock at the edge of the Milky Way is no longer a planet. Former Intel CEO Paul Otellini is contacted by Steve Jobs regarding Apple needing a processor for a, 3.5-inch capacitive touchscreen phone? Mainstream phones now are just reaching screen sizes of 6.8 inches. But if you put yourself in that time frame, it sounds ridiculous. This is a time when a company named Research in Motion is making the most popular phone, which contains a physical keyboard. And now this Apple touchscreen product is going to come in and replace physical keyboards altogether? Newsflash, they tried that before and it didn't work. Otellini was confused, and rightfully so. He had no frame of reference for what a touchscreen phone was going to mean to consumers. He claims that Apple asked for the processor at too low of a cost, and the volume of sales wouldn't have made up for that margin. Turns out the volume was maybe 100 times what they expected. And that seems to be the bulk of the story being reported online. Strange. It seems like a much bigger deal. Apple ended up settling with Samsung to design and manufacture their processors. In fact, they settled with Samsung in more than one way. I guess we should consider why the deal didn't go through. We mentioned Intel's uneasiness at the idea of the iPhone, but it turns out that Apple had its own apprehensions with Intel. We know now that Apple is proficient in the design of their own silicon, perhaps even best in class. It's gotten to the point where they've shifted some of their Intel-based Mac computers to their own in-house processors, to much acclaim I should add. But before all of that, they had specific needs for the kinds of chips that would go in their products. So what were Apple's apprehensions with Intel? Why don't we get a direct quote from the mastermind himself? Steve Jobs is quoted as saying in his autobiography, "There are 2 reasons that we didn't go with them. One was that they're just really slow. They're like a steamship, not very flexible. We're used to going pretty fast. Second is that we didn't want to just teach them everything which they could go and sell to our competitors." That makes sense. Apple has generally been on the cutting edge, and Intel is very methodical and precise with their design and release of products. You can't blame them, because designing a chip with billions of transistors means you have to pay attention to every little detail. But Apple has always, until recently, been about taking risks and upsetting the established order, if this commercial didn't already make that clear. Jobs goes on to say, "At the high performance level, Intel is the best. They build the fastest if you don't care about power and cost. We tried to help Intel, but they don't listen much." Ouch. It's pretty clear that Apple didn't want to throw in a power-hungry, unoptimized processor in the iPhone, as phones were expected to last all day. We talk about all-day battery life nowadays, but phones were expected to last 2 to 3 days before the onset of smartphones. Now that phones were going to be more like computers, Apple needed the most efficient chip possible for their phones to be survivable. This is where the type of instruction set architecture, or ISA, gets involved. Intel develops and maintains the x86 architecture, which is in virtually every consumer computer, whether you're running Windows or Mac OS. Your laptop, your desktop, they're likely all running on x86. They license that instruction set to AMD as well. At a high level, the advantage of this architecture is that the wide set of instructions make it very powerful and allow for the best performance. The disadvantage, as mentioned by Jobs, is that it's a lot more power hungry. If you're on a desktop which demands more performance and is generally stationary, you might be fine with this. But on a device that's barely ever plugged in, this poses a fundamental problem. I think Jobs knew that the adoption of an unknown mobile device was going to be difficult enough, and having to charge your phone 3 times a day wasn't going to help his case. The alternative is ARM, an architecture that runs on every iPhone, every Android phone, nearly every smartphone or similar device. The advantages of ARM are that its streamlined instruction set and design make it very power efficient. The downside, of course, is that it can't come close to the sheer performance of an x86 system. But for a mobile device that didn't do much besides make calls and play music, I guess it made sense. It's also amazing to see now what Apple's able to crank out of a desktop ARM chip in their late 2020 Mac lineup. The conversation around ARM and x86 has evolved to the point that Apple's ARM chips are competing in the mid to high-end market, but the aforementioned concerns were so valid at the time of the iPhone's conception. Apple ended up going with Samsung for not just the first, but next several iPhones. And remember how Steve Jobs said he didn't want to teach Intel their process only for them to go to their competitors? Yeah, it turns out they made a competitor elsewhere. And the rest is history. Apple designed their first chip, or more specifically system on a chip, with the iPhone 4, launching their cleverly named A line of processors. The manufacturing was still outsourced to a couple of companies, one of which is, you guessed it, Samsung. But Apple designing their own SoCs and becoming really freaking good at it is what brings us to now, where Apple is kicking Intel to the curb altogether. The efficiency and success provided to them by their design process gives them the confidence to essentially manufacture desktop-grade processors in-house on the ARM architecture, an instruction set once considered far inferior. This goes to show that you should not give Apple a reason to start making first-party versions of hardware that they're outsourcing already, because chances are, they'll find a way to do it better than you. Intel, you done messed up. I'm sure they're not mad, owning 80% of desktop market share, but if we are to consider the market share Apple has in the mobile space, this could be put down as one of the biggest tech what-ifs of the 21st century.